Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Frida Cinema. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Wonderful to see you all. Quick show of hands. If you could tell me if this is the first time that you're going to see The Neverending Story. Any first timers? A lone person, 1, 2, okay. All right, and then a quick show of hands if this is your all-time favorite feel-good childhood movie that you watched over and over again. You had a battered VHS copy. Let's have some hands for that one. Anybody? All right, we've got a lot of hands. I'm so excited to share this movie with you this evening. Welcome to the Frida Cinema. Thank you so much for coming out. Do we have any members in the house tonight? Thank you, members. Wonderful. If you're not a member of the Frida Cinema yet, really encourage you to join, get a membership card, get some discounts, and come around a little more often. The Neverending Story is part of our Science on Screen series, which we got from a grant from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and it pairs classic films with talks from leading STEM academics from around the country. So we're going to have Dr. KIRSTEN READ joining us this evening, and she's going to do a short presentation about her research, which has some great alignment with the Neverending Story. Dr. Reed is an associate professor of psychology at Santa Clara University and teaches courses on child development and publishes research on the language and learning benefits from shared storybook reading with young children. So she's going to give a short presentation about her research and then have time for a couple of questions before we dive into the film. So without further ado, Bobby, can we introduce Dr. Reed from all the way in Santa Clara? Here she is. Hello, nice to meet you. So
hello.
Please, big round of applause for Dr. Reed. I'll pass it over.
Hello, I hope everyone can hear me. Okay, we did our sound check. I'm so excited to be here, and I love this movie. So it's quite a joy to put my work and this film together. I'm going to talk about why it's good for kids to get lost in books, which is the whole theme of the night. And so, without further ado, I bet many of us here are readers, and I'm sure most of us enjoy stories, whether we watch them on film or tell them over a campfire or read them in quiet, tucked away corners. I also bet that many of us can remember reading a favorite book as a child or having a favorite book read to us, which is what I spend most of my research life studying. But you may wonder what capital S science has to say about this particular human pastime, and why we read stories. So plenty of early educational research and developmental science demonstrates that kids who are read to frequently and who are skilled at reading enjoy many academic benefits. It turns out there's quite a mountain of evidence that the more children read and are read to from early on, the better they become at standardized tests of reading comprehension and writing composition. No surprise, really. But I'm interested in a different question, really, and that's does getting lost in a really good story, a never-ending story, perhaps, have more psychological impacts on a child than just helping them boost their English class grades or verbal SAT scores? So I think so. I'm going to hopefully convince all. It reminds me at the beginning of this film, you'll see, right, like a stressed out and impatient father says to his young son, you need to stop daydreaming and start facing your problems. And I wonder, is it possible that stories can help children do that, face their problems? It may be intuitive, I think, to some of you, but I'd like to tell everyone about how curious and creative researchers have tried to document some of the more emotional and abstract benefits of reading for children beyond the classroom. And in particular, we developmental psychologists have good reason to believe that beyond just the cognitive, kind of academic, intellectual benefits, reading stories can measurably help children connect, empathize, learn, especially learn new language, and extend their imaginations. So here we go. So first of all, we know from both correlational research and intervention studies, where there's a change and then we observe the effects of the change, based on just simple surveys, self-studies, that parents and children who read together more frequently do have warmer interactions and more emotional responsivity. So there's a lot of different ways of measuring that. It seems squishy and hard, I know, but sort of over and over again, as recently as in 2020, right, we see that that correlation exists. Just, you know, at the very first stages of reading, when parents are reading with their young children, there's some emotional benefit for just being engaged in that experience. Reading aloud with another person also has effects, other emotional effects. And so work done in my lab with college students and preschoolers a couple of years ago, where we had college students and preschoolers reading in pairs, has shown that reading together has unique positive mood boosting effects. For the readers, not just the listeners being read to, those readers felt calmer and happier and more interconnected after reading a short story with a partner, and more so even than other pairs who were reading alone. It's reading side by side is good, but reading together is better. And also they were happier and had more of a mood boost than other pairs who were doing puzzles together and solving problems together. So the study really showed that there's something really unique and special about sharing a story with someone else. And I think, again, it's an emotional benefit that goes well beyond just what we learn from the books that we read for class. But reading in particular, reading fiction has also been found to be associated over and over again, actually, with greater empathy in children and adolescents. This is just a really lovely finding. But of course, I know that you might be wondering, is that a correlation or is there a causal direction, right? It could be that reading fiction builds empathy, or it could be that more empathetic kids just are more drawn to reading stories. So I want to tell you about one of my favorite studies on this topic. It's not actually from my own lab, but I think it's worth sharing, and it's so resonant with the movie that we're going to see tonight. So a researcher, Rachel Carniel at the University of Tel Aviv, used this really creative way of testing how kindergarten-age children related to the protagonist in a story. And understood his perspective and became emotionally invested in his dilemma. And they used the story of a little dog named Zumi, who is in the story is being bullied by a bigger dog, but is afraid to tell his parents about it for fear that the big dog bullying him is going to get angry. And so in Carniel's study, some of the children were read the whole story of Zumi and would then ask questions about Zumi's feelings and actions and why Zumi does what he does to kind of test their comprehension. And then they're asked to take a break and draw a picture, just as a break activity. But another group of children were read the same story, but were paused and asked to take their break and draw a picture before hearing the resolution of the story. So the happy ending where everything works out okay for Zumi. And the children's drawings in both cases, they're just take a break and do a drawing. Were done just with pencil on white paper. But the white paper had several carbon copy sheets underneath. And so what the researchers did is they took those drawings and they could test which children pressed down hardest while they were drawing. These are kindergartners, and some were at the end of the story and some were in the middle of it. This how much they pressed down during their drawing was a measure, this really creative measure of empathetic arousal. So really kind of like how worried some of the kids were about the puppy and his dilemma, how much they were emotionally empathizing with that main character of the story. And of course, as you might have guessed, it was those children in the group that had not yet heard the resolution of Zumi's story, hadn't heard the happy ending or known what was going to happen in the midst of his dilemma. Those kids who were most afraid for Zumi before he got out of trouble and did have a happy ending, who pressed through the most sheets of carbon paper in this study. So this is it's just a really interesting way of capturing something that we feel to be true, which is that that not only do children, as they read stories, fiction stories, understand and comprehend the feelings of the characters in the stories that they read, but they feel those emotions along with the characters that they relate to. They can imagine and become part of the stories that they read, even at a young age. And so that is a bit of causal evidence that reading fiction can build empathy over development. Okay. So in my own career of research, I admit, I have focused more on what kids learn from stories in the more traditional sense. So I work a lot on how children's vocabularies are boosted and extended through reading and being read to. Vocabulary is a really important indicator of a lot of cognitive development. But with the advent of big data analytic approaches, linguists like me, kind of bean counters, who are interested in language development, have been able to quantify the differences between the text in children's books, what children are exposed to when they're reading or being read to, and just the everyday speech kids use and hear in conversation. So with massive samples of transcribed caregiver and child conversations, the sort of everyday back and forth in the kitchen or the living room between parents and children, like thousands of hours of recordings have been made and transcribed, and with big corpora of the text of hundreds of children's books, we can really do big analyses on what reading has to offer children above and beyond everyday language. And so just the obligatory graph as just one example among many. We've used a measure to quantify these differences between what's in books and what's just in everyday speech. We've used a measure called a type token ratio to quantify how diverse a block of language is. So, you know, a conversation said aloud or a paragraph of a children's book could be thought of as like a block of language. And basically, the more unique words there are out of the total number of words used in a block of text, the higher the type to token ratio. And what that means, higher a type token ratio is, that means the language itself is more diverse. When the type token ratio is higher, that means the language is diverse, it's less repetitive, it's less predictable, it's more unique. And so, again, it might be intuitive, if anyone out there is a reader, it might be intuitive that there are just more unique words in books, that there is more variety of language in a story. If you think about Once Upon a Time in an Eerie Forest Enclave versus everyday conversation like, hey, eat your breakfast, it seems obvious that there's more variety. But this graph quantifies that for us. So this graph is from a 2021 analysis that my lab is also working to replicate, or has replicated, that shows the magnitude of the difference between what's in the books, the language of books, and everyday conversation for kids. And I think my pointer will work. I hope you can see it. But right here, just at the very beginning of the graph, you can see that what we have is that, the types on the y-axis and the tokens on the x-axis. So the higher these lines go, the bigger the ratio becomes, right? The more diverse the language is. And this gold line is the language coming from picture books, from children's picture books, while the green line is from their spoken language conversations that they're hearing. And you can see right here at this point already, there's 1,000 unique words. Where did my pointing go? 1,000 unique words for every 5,000 total words, right? So that's a 0.2 type token ratio for book language. While for conversational language at that same point, there's only 500 unique words for every 5,000 words they hear. And so half the type token ratio, right? A 0.1 type token ratio. So that's cool. That's a big difference, right? In just how much variety kids are exposed to in the language that they hear from books or that they're reading in books. But what's also cool about these findings is how this changes with exposure, with experience. So the more a child reads or hears language, the older they get, the greater the magnitude of these differences. So once they get to 50,000 words, the type token ratio is even higher for book language than it is for just everyday conversation. It's a compounding effect over time. And what it tells us is that just in terms of just new words that kids are exposed to, reading gives a huge advantage. It just exposes kids to way more language than they get from everyday life. But what does hearing so many unique and diverse words in the context of a story really buy a child? Besides the possibility of sounding precocious when they use their big vocabularies around grown-ups, I think that's the most important question. And what I believe, and what a lot of other research would show, is that all these words, all this new words, all this language that they're hearing or reading in storybooks gives us access to new ideas. So it's not just new words, but new words become portals for new ideas, new concepts, and they are able to transport us beyond our everyday lives. And here's some words to look for in the never-ending story tonight. So in the end, I'd just like to say, why do we read stories? Why do we encourage kids to read stories? Because stories build imagination. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reed. I'm going to hold the microphone open for any questions that folks may have in the audience. You can put your hand up if you have a question for Dr. Reed about her research or her connection to the film. Yeah, we got one back here. I'm on my way.
Hello, I'm just wondering if this included like audiobooks or was it only just like physical?
Oh, which part? The last, the big graph
kind
of
of
type
in-
token ratio?
Just kind of in general, because you had the one point that where like reading to someone increases like the cohesion or something like that, and it kind of seems like audiobooks might also trip that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the work that I do personally in my lab is parents or other adult caregivers reading aloud to their children. And I think all the benefits that kids get from reading on their own, they get from being read to. And so I think an audiobook, is in that same flavor. It can be, just anecdotally, people's experience of audiobooks can sometimes be even more intimate because it feels like someone is reading to you. It's got that, you know, a connection to our earliest memories of stories, which are oral, because we're all usually able to listen to stories before we're literate and can read them on our own. So absolutely, yes. Like audiobooks expose kids to more words, and those words expose them to new ideas, and audiobooks can increase people's mood and pleasure. I mean, of course, it depends on the content. If you're reading something scary or frustrating, it's not going to make you happy. But the act of reading, especially when you're sharing it with someone else, really does seem to have these emotional and empathetic benefits. Yeah, audiobooks for the win, if that's your bag.
Thank you. We got one more.
Hi, thanks for coming in today. Parts of this movie really scarred me as a kid, but I would make my kid watch it anyway. Does that make me a bad person?
Absolutely not. I feel the same way. I watched this movie when I was a kid, and it was scary, but I couldn't not watch it, you know, just a kind of with my eyes peeking through my fingers. And I also just shared it with my own kids this weekend, and it's wonderful. I think it's why I wanted to describe this this study about Zumi the dog to you all, because I think it's that feeling of like there are scary moments, and someone who's really invested in a story has an emotional connection to the protagonist, and you feel fear and feel the ups and downs of that character, and that is like that's a benefit. Scary, but luckily, like in the Zumi the dog in the Zumi the dog study, and also in this movie, right, if you stay till the end, then you get the happy ending, and it can, you know, the resolution of that fear can be really healthy and good.
I had a question. Have there been any studies about the impact of specific book titles, or just is it reading in general?
Yeah, in my work, we do a lot of like, oh, what about this type of book, and what about that type of book in terms of language. So I not like specific titles, but we're finding in my lab that for younger kids, so this is before they're like literate on their own, usually sort of preschool 4 or 5-year-old kids, books that have a lot of structure, so like rhyming children's books, Dr. Seuss books, or ones with that are very you know, that are really providing like predictability of structure while also providing like creativity of language, are those that are going to support like all this extra word learning, compared to more just kind of straight narrative once upon a time books. But I think some of the emotional benefits and sort of connectivity benefits of reading will also depend less on like the structure of the language, but more on the content of the books too, right? Obviously, there's work to be done to find out whether like funny books promote more bonding or whether sad books promote more empathy, right? Like we don't know exactly what the connections are between many different genres and content and what the result is. We just know it all sort of piques awareness of language and emotional experience for kids.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Thank you again, Dr. Read, for joining us. We hope you have a lovely evening in Santa Clara. We'll say goodbye to you now in Santa Ana, and we're going to get started with the Neverending Story. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you down the line. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.